I'm Sam, I'm 21. I've been riding bikes for about 5 years now. Currently on a CB400. I play hockey for my uni and a club. Currently vice captain of my hockey team at uni. World War I broke out on the 28th of July 1914 after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The assassination sparked a diplomatic crisis that drew the Austro-Hungarian Empire together with Germany against the Allied forces of Britain, France and the Russian Empire. This was to be one of the deadliest conflicts that the world has seen, resulting in the deaths of 9 million soldiers and 7 million civilians. In France, Allied forces clashed with Germany, leading to a deadly stalemate forming the Western Front. Both sides dug in to fight a long war of attrition. Attrition warfare is a deliberate attempt to wear the opponent down through inflicting continual heavy losses or damage, eventually leading to the opponent being defeated. Both forces excavated trenches which spread from the North Sea to the border with Switzerland in the south. These trenches were scenes of some of the worst fighting in the war, as one side attempted to wear down the other. The modern-day motorcycle's evolution has been influenced by the war. Pre-war motorcycles effectively resembled bicycles with engines. During the war, motorcycles were manufactured by Douglas and Triumph and started to resemble the modern-day machine by the end of the war. At the start of the hostilities, the War Office sent out an appeal for motorcycle dispatch riders. Men and women alike took up the call. Men mainly served on the front line, while women, who were not allowed to fight, served as dispatch riders behind the lines, with the Women's Royal Naval Service. Other women served as drivers and mechanics, freeing men to fight on the front line. Motorcycle dispatch riders played an essential role on the Western Front. Radio and telephone communications could be intercepted by the enemy, so orders and information were sent by motorcycle courier. A dispatch rider also had to deliver equipment and transport occasional personnel. Maps were often of poor quality and in short supply, and the exact location of troops was often inaccurate. Dispatch riders had to learn to locate battalions and develop knowledge of the area. Captain William Watson was one rider who served with the Royal Engineers Signal Service on the Western Front in 1914. Like many early dispatch riders, he initially used his own motorcycle. Later on, the Army supplied motorcycles manufactured by Douglas and Triumph. Watson wrote the book Adventures of a Dispatch Rider, recounting his experiences on the front line.
On a motorcycle, if you're going rapidly, you cannot hear bullets or shells coming, or even shells bursting unless they are very near. Running slowly, with the engine barely turning over, you can hear everything. So I went slow and listened. Through the air came that sharp whooping sound of the shrapnel bursting towards you, the most devilish sound of all, but nothing frightens me as much as the shrapnel shriek.
The Battle of Mons, located along the Mons Canal, took place on the 23rd of August 1914. It was the last of the 4 battles that was to be fought during the opening month of the war. The canal's route formed part of a salient, which made it difficult to defend. Prolonged and heavy fighting led to French withdrawal, leaving British forces unsupported. Orders were given for the British, who had successfully repelled German attacks, to withdraw.
I was sent out to find General Glichin, who was reported somewhere near Wasmay. I went over nightmare roads, uneven cobbles with great pits in them. We had already heard guns, but on my way back I heard a distant crash and looked around to find that a shell had burst half a mile away on a slag heap between Dower and myself. With my heart thumping against my ribs, I opened the throttle until I was jumping at 40 miles an hour from cobble to cobble. Then, realising that I was in far greater danger of breaking my neck than being shot, I pulled myself together and slowed down to proceed sedately home.
After the Battle of Mons, feeling let down by the French, British soldiers retreated from the German advance. Watson helped army divisions keep in contact as the British Expeditionary Force moved towards Paris. From his various trips, Watson reported that morale was high among the troops. Most soldiers blamed the French for the retreat, believing the battle could have been won. The retreat was seen as a tactical withdrawal rather than a defeat.
Riding back, I heard some shouting, a momentary silence, and then a flare of the finest blasphemy. I turned the bend to see an officer holding his severed wrist and cursing. He was one of those dashing fellows. He had ridden alongside the transport, swearing at the men to get a move on. He held up his arm to give the signal when a ricochet took his hand cleanly off.
The first battle at Asney was early in the war, and after a hasty pursuit of the enemy, William Watson found himself in the middle of the battle.
On Sunday morning, the 13th of September, we were over the Asney River and got into position to attack. We were lying down in a field when a German aeroplane came over and dropped a ball of smoke, which remained in the air for about a minute, giving the Germans our range. They soon got at us, and I was hit with the first shell. A shrapnel bullet passed through my left arm and glanced off my ammunition pouch, which was full. Had the pouch been empty, the bullet probably would have passed through my body and I would have been killed.
The open countryside didn't offer much concealment to the troops, and therefore they dug deep, narrow paths into the ground, being the start of trench warfare. The soldiers acquired pickaxes and shovels from the local farms and villages to assist with digging the trenches, which were dug to about 7 foot deep. Life in the trenches was hard. The soldiers suffered hugely with boredom, and the living conditions were appalling. With the constant threat of enemy shooting and shelling, and sending over poison gas, the troops only had basic food rations, which consisted of bully beef, tea, hard biscuits and stale bread. The soldiers also had to cope with all weathers, freezing conditions or very wet conditions that turned the battlefields and low-lying trenches into total mud baths. The water in some trenches could reach waist height, and as a result the men suffered from trench foot, where their feet would swell and even turn gangrenous and require amputation. Rats and lice were one of the biggest issues facing the troops. Lice drove them crazy with biting, bringing them diseases which gave them fevers, whilst the rats roamed the trenches, eating corpses of the men who died where they fell, and even attacking men when they slept.
As there was nowhere else to sleep, we found ourselves resting in the ditch. We were comfortable if confined. I was frightened when the order came down, passed the word to the motorcyclist. I crawled up to the general and received my dispatch, and started walking across the field. Then I discovered there was a great difference between motorcycling under rifle fire, when you can hear only the very close ones, and walking across a field when you can hear them all. 2/3 of the way across, a sharp zip of a bullet passed the back of my neck, and I remembered the 3 men stretchered dead across, and that caused me to panic, and I ran for my life.
William Watson visited Ypres early in 1914. It was to become the site of 5 major battles during the war. The first battle took place between the 19th of October and the 22nd of November 1914. In this battle, the British forces were outnumbered by 2-1 and under-resourced. During the battle, 30% of the army were killed and numerous more soldiers wounded. The final battle occurred in 1918. By the end of the war, every single building in the town had been risen to the ground. The Battle of the Somme was fought in 1916 and has come to symbolise the horrors of the war. The strategy aimed to wear the enemy down with a relentless barrage of artillery fire and direct attack. The cost of the battle was high and the prize was small. By the end of the Battle of the Somme, over 1 million soldiers had been killed on both sides, and the Allies had only advanced by 7 miles into enemy terrain. Fighting on the Western Front had a terrible effect on soldiers, and many experienced shell shock. Shell shock, a psychological condition leading to severe anxiety or loss of control, was caused by being exposed to continual artillery fire. It often went undiagnosed, and soldiers suffering from it were expected to carry on fighting. Desertion was common, and it carried the sentence of death by firing squad. Some soldiers who were executed were as young as 16 years old. The war drew to an end in November 1918 when Russia's government collapsed in the east and the Allies won victory over the Germans in the west. By the 11th of November, the war was over. After the war, battlefield cemeteries and memorials were constructed around Europe. Vimy Ridge was built commemorating 11,000 Canadian soldiers whose bodies were lost on the battlefield. Menin Gate, located in Ypres, is one of 4 British and Commonwealth memorials designed by Sir Reginald Blomfield. Inscribed in the walls are the names of 54,000 men missing in action, with no known grave. Every day at 8 p.m. we hear the sounding of the last post, remembering the sacrifices of these soldiers. This ceremony has become part of daily life for those living in Ypres. The map in Europe was radically changed after the war. Empires fell, forgotten nations found new independence, and new nations were born. A new world organisation, the League of Nations, was created to maintain international cooperation and world peace. It failed in this task, and the world would be at war once again within 20 years. William Watson left the front by 1915, but motorcycle dispatch riders continued to play an active part in the war effort. Watson died in 1932, aged 41. Sir John French, Commander-in-Chief, said of the contribution made by dispatch riders to the war effort:
Carrying dispatches and messages at all hours of the day and night, in every kind of weather, and often traversing bad roads blocked with transport, they have been conspicuously successful in maintaining an extraordinary degree of efficiency in the service of communications. Many casualties have occurred in their ranks, but no amount of difficulty or danger has ever checked the energy or ardour which has distinguished them throughout the operations.